Around the mid-90s, my brother and his father-in-law bought the big farm which we own now. Needed a bit of work, but it was mainly all in pasture, and they had a knock on the door from this guy called Laurie Donald. He lives down the bottom of our catchment, real legend. And he said to my bro, "Hey mate, you've just bought one of the most environmentally degraded farms in the Western Bay of Plenty." And my bro says, "What?" He didn't really understand. He said, "Well, what's happening is that in the little catchment where that farm's located, right at the top of the Te Mania Catchment, all the sediment coming from this farm is going all the way down and landing into the Tauranga Moana, the Tauranga Harbour. And so the other thing that was an eye-opener was to do stream health scores. Back that time, the stream health was probably a 2 out of 10. So when I came along, we'd fenced off the riparian, and we also had planted some riparian areas. I trotted along in 2015 and I said, "Bro, man, we've got to start looking at our repo, our critical source areas, which were former wetlands. Let's have a look at reinstating some little sponges and filters onto our farm." So we started that, and we identified 8 areas which should be in wetland. And so over the last 5 to 10 years, we've reinstated those back into repo. Out of that, we also identified some steep erodible slopes which are still in pasture. We took them out and put them into native ngāhere. The water, the wai leaving our farm, it's now a 9 out of 10 score.
Hello, kia ora. I'm Anna.
And I'm Callum from Conservation Amplified.
And you're listening to the People Helping Nature podcast.
Our mission is to make conservation mainstream, one topic at a time.
Welcome back. In our last episode of the People Helping Nature podcast, we spoke with Sam, the Trapman Gibson, about the rise, role and impact of catchment groups in the conservation space. Today, we're covering another angle of the catchment group space by chatting with John Burke, a Bay of Plenty farmer whose family turned one of the region's most degraded catchments into a success story. John, welcome to the show. Would you like to start by introducing yourself, your roles in the ag sector and your farm?
Thanks for the opportunity to be here today, and following from that legend, Sam the Trapman, is pretty cool. I should have been the curtain raiser for him. But anyway, I was brought up on a farm in South Auckland, so from a farming background, and went through the usual route, agricultural science and Massey University. And then back in the day, we had an institution called the Rural Bank, which is a government-owned bank which lent to farmers, and it was the main lender to farmers back then. And so I worked for them for several years before going out on my own as a consultant, and I was a valuer as well, but I was mainly consulting with farmers and also growers. I ended up moving over to the Bay of Plenty here in the early 80s when it was the kiwi fruit boom days, and then was fortunate enough to become involved as an investor with a Māori-based horticultural kiwi fruit joint venture, Te Awanui Hukapak, and that was in the early 90s. It was probably one of the first co-governance models, which worked really well. We had a fantastic team, grew that business with Māori kiwi fruit growers and also other growers, from 300,000 trays up to over 4 million trays over 20 years. And then out of that, ended up heading up the PSA incursion in 2010 when we were struck with PSA, and out of that rolled into working with Convita, examining plantation manuka as a viable land use, retiring steep erodible land into manuka for honey. That was a cool project, and a lot of learnings out of that in terms of establishing colonisers cheaply for ngāhere establishment. And then in about 2015, I invested with my brother into the family farm, and I've been working on that, and I'm also an organic kiwi fruit grower, gold. Yeah.
A lot of hats.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for your introduction, John, and kia ora also from my part. Welcome to the show. Can you please take us back to the family farm that you just mentioned, that your brother Rick bought, and when you guys first kind of realized that the farm was part of the problem in the Te Mania Catchment? Like, what was going on back then?
Around the mid-90s, about 95, my brother and his father-in-law bought the big farm which we own now. They thought they'd bought this farm, and it needed a bit of work, but it was mainly all in pasture. So the previous farmers, they're just like normal farmers. Every blade of grass counted, And I was brought up that way. In fact, when I worked for the Rural Bank, we had a lending scheme, heaven forbid, where it was called the Land Development Encouragement Loan Scheme. So this is back in the late 70s, where we were advancing money for farmers to knock down, in some cases, mature native bush, certainly scrub land to go into pasture. So we're trying to get as much of the Aotearoa farm and pasture as we could. I called it the EGA mentality, effective grassed area. That was our real focus. We also had another scheme called the Low Stock Incentive Scheme, which people termed the skinny sheep scheme because we wanted to have as many sheep on the ground as possible. We've got our sheep numbers up to about 72 million. In about 1982. It's now, I don't know, what is it now, about 26 million or something like that. Well, it was a crazy scheme, really, but that's what we're doing back in those days. And so you go back to the mid-90s, a similar sort of thing where my brother was farming and he was wanting to have all that land in grass. And then they bought this farm and they had a knock on the door from this guy called Laurie Donald. He lives down the bottom of our catchment. Real legend. And he was working for the Bay of Plenty Regional Council at the time. And he said to my bro, hey mate, you've just bought one of the most environmentally degraded farms in the Western Bay of Plenty. And my bro says, what? He didn't really understand. He said, well, what's happening is that in the little catchment where that farm's located, right at the top of the Te Mania Catchment, it's only 1,300 hectares, but we're right at the top, bounding onto the dock estate in the Kaimai Range. And he says, all the sediment coming from this farm is going all the way down. It's only 2 or 3 kilometres and landing into the Tauranga Moana, the Tauranga Harbour. In fact, the Te Mania Catchment, or the receiving body, which is the estuary, is the most degraded in the whole Tauranga Harbour. And they assessed that from a number of factors, but one of them was back in the late 50s, that catchment had about 80 hectares of seagrass. And because of sedimentation, the seagrass had dwindled down to zero. You know, there's issues right through the Tauranga Moana, but that was the worst. So the idea was if we could remediate and undertake environmental restoration on our farm, it would make a significant difference to the sediment that was accumulating at the bottom of that catchment.
I find being born in a different generation, growing up in the 2000s, it's easy to look back and think that's just crazy and to think without fully understanding the picture. But I really want to get into what life was like as a farmer and the farming culture back in the 70s and 80s. You talk about the land development schemes and getting the maximum grassed area. I'm wondering, like, where does that decision come from? Is it from science? Is it from politics? Is it from industry? If you were to put yourself in the shoes of a farmer back in the day, like, how did they see this? Was there any concern over the ecological health, or was that something that hadn't quite evolved into the public consciousness just yet?
I think the latter. There were farmers that would have been concerned. In fact, even my dad, when I was lending money to bowl over scrub and that sort of thing, he said to me, son, you should leave that land. Leave it to go back into Manuka. This was at the Coromandel. I remember pointing out a site. So there was that, but we're torn between wanting to do the best for the economy. You know, the farmers were the backbone of the economy. And farmers will actually, if you point them in the right direction, they'll get stuff done to go in that direction. So they were pointing for maximum production, not necessarily productivity. So they're going for it. And they had the incentives, the financial incentives, say through the Rural Bank to do that back then.
Was there any major voice in the public sphere saying, hold on, let's just slow down and consider this? Or was it kind of everyone was moving towards let's maximize production in all areas of the economy, the politics, the media? Like, what did it look like? Was it all moving that way, or was there also a bit of a shadow of doubt?
There's shadow of doubt, and the movement's building. So you had Greenpeace starting up, that sort of thing. And, you know, there's things happening in New Zealand. In the late 70s, a group of heroes tied themselves to trees to prevent the clear felling of that iconic podocarp forest. So that sort of thing was happening. So the national government at that time shut down the clear felling of those sorts of things at that time. So which was a pretty cool thing for them to do that as well. Things were starting to move, but not in a big way. And I think, to be fair, we weren't measuring the impact we're having on our environment. We had catchment boards back there, not catchment groups. Regional councils weren't really in existence. So we didn't have that sort of measurement to say, hold on, guys, we're making some serious damage. So it wasn't until we rolled into the 90s, because we had an environment BOP back then, we started to measure that and realised that we're actually causing some damage in certain catchments. And the other thing, nitrogen use really didn't kick in until the late sort of 80s, and then started to ramp up big time and intensive dairying. So it was really into the 90s, early 2000s that we started to realise we had a problem.
And there's delayed effects on that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for painting that picture, John. I think that's really crucial for our audience to get that baseline of understanding for our korero today. So once the regional council knocked at Rick's door and made him aware that, hey, you're part of the problem, what were the first changes that you guys made on the farm, and what was the feeling about starting that journey and knowing what's ahead?
If Rick was here, it'd be interesting to see what he answered that question, because he's probably went into denial to start off with, which is a lot of us went into denial. But to give credit to this guy, Laurie Donald, he was able to explain to my bro and demonstrate. And what was pretty cool, which a lot of farmers don't get, was Te Mania Catchment's only a little catchment. And so the cause and effect was right there. We weren't sort of like 50 kilometres from the coast or anything like that. We could actually see what was happening. And so the other thing that was an eye-opener was to do stream health scores. Back that time, the stream health was probably a 2 out of 10. So demonstrating to my brother and his father-in-law, and his father-in-law is a bit of an environmentalist, that things can be a whole lot better, and this is some of the things you need to address to improve things, got them on the journey. And so that first stage of our restoration was focused on riparian management. We had a lot of riparian strips anyway, which our cattle and stuff were just going in and walking through the stream. There's a photo of my bro, fit as a buck rat, in 1998. He's just fenced off something like about 15 k's of riparian fence line. So he wrapped fences around all that riparian zones. And then he suddenly realised that by doing this, it gives him options of the way he can manage his pastoral land. So he subdivided the farm into land management units. By creating these fence lines around the riparian strips, he was able to fence off the steeper areas and so have more homogeneous blocks of land where he could then manage in specific ways.
Right. It makes so much sense. It's funny, we had a bit of cash to fund some native tree plantings about a year ago, and we funded some forever trees on a farm as part of the Kaukako ecological expansion project. And we were talking to the farmer who received the trees. And he was saying he was fencing off his riparian streams and steep, highly erodible hillsides and areas surrounding original forest. And he said, a lot of farmers around my area kind of joke about how I'm the greenie and stuff, but they don't understand that my farm's actually so much more productive because I'm not pulling cows out of swamp and dealing with all these hassles that cost time and money, and I can just focus on the best parts of the farm.
So true, Callum, because my brother recalls a day when the surf was absolutely pumping and he had to pull a heifer out of the stream. And he thought, why am I doing this? If I had this fenced off, I'd be out in the waves, So exactly the same light bulb moment for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's not necessarily always about money, but it definitely can make more money. But we'll get to that later. But for now, I really want to touch on who were the key people or organisations that helped your family farm along the way?
Yeah, well, back then it was Environment BOP, and that specifically this fellow, Laurie Donald. It got us on the journey. My brother's a pretty can-do guy, so it wasn't a matter of needing contractors and stuff. He went and did a lot of the mahi himself and got advice, and we made mistakes. The focus, I said, was on our riparian strips. So we had this area right at the top of the farm that needed to be planted, and heaven forbid he got a consultant in who happened to be a forestry consultant. I mean, he probably never knew at the time, but we ended up planting this riparian strip into Lusitanicas, which is a exotic tree. And I always say to my brother, why the heck did we do that, mate? It should have been a native, without a question. So, it's quite good taking people when we have field days about preaching to them the right tree, right place. And also when you start to do a landscape plan. So actually plan what you want to do in terms of your restoration, because it's a long-term project. And when you build a house, you do a plan. same deal. When you do your landscaping in your garden at home, you do a plan. Do the same for your farm and get the right tree, right place. And we say to our regional council also that when they do catchment planning, working with catchment groups, etc., they should be actually providing guidance around what sort of trees we should be putting into our landscape and where, because people don't necessarily know that. And we are going to be removing these exotics over time and replacing them with native. It's only a small area, but still it's wrong tree, wrong place. And there's a whole lot of New Zealand that we have totally done wrong tree, wrong place for geological reasons, but also other reasons as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. That's such a good point.
Yeah, I think this is a never-ending journey. We are always learning. We are always improving. Looking back, like you say, you have these moments and you go like, what the heck did we do that for? Now we know better, so let's improve on the mistakes of the past. And you've been on a 25-year journey by now. So what does the farm look today? Like you already mentioned the riparian plantings, but what else have you done over that time frame?
Yeah, so when I came along, we'd fenced off the riparian and we also had planted some riparian areas. So I trotted along in 2015 and I said, bro, man, we're going to start looking at our repo, our critical source areas which were former wetlands. Let's have a look at reinstating some little sponges and filters onto our farm. So we started there and we identified 8 areas which should be in wetland. And so over the last 5 to 10 years, we've reinstated those back into repo. Then out of that, we also identified some steep erodible slopes which are still in pasture. We took them out and put them into native Ngāhere. Because I'd been involved with Convita and Landcorp, Hawke's Bay Regional Council, all part of this PGP project around Manuka. I said, let's just plant our natives as we would have done Manuka. But we didn't just use Manuka, we used Kanuka as well. So I wasn't doing it for honey. I was doing to kickstart that first stage of Ngāhere establishment. So out of that was evolved what we call the Te Mata method, which means start that natural reversion process, which is a lot cheaper way of establishing natives. So we did that for our wetlands and our steep erodible slopes.
Yeah, awesome. You mentioned how you turn these wetlands back into, formal wetlands back into wetland using sponges and other forms of restoration. I think it's just really important to note why we want to slow down the flow of water in winter, in times of heavy rain, seems to be in Christmas time these days. But it's really important that the water doesn't just wash away into the ocean really fast, because for one, it doesn't water the plants and trees in Ngāhere, but also that takes the nutrients and sedimentation away. And then if we have the sponges holding water in the ground, and that also ensures that we can keep the land healthy in the summer and droughts as well. So I just wanted to make that as a side note.
Definitely, but there's also an economic driver as well, because if you actually look at those little footprints of land, I mean, we've taken out probably about 25 hectares since 2015 out of the system. And you look at, so your steep erodible slopes, for example, and you say, well, how many kilograms of dry matter am I producing off here for my sheep and cattle to graze? Most cases sheep, because you're not putting heavy cattle up there. What's the energy value, what we call the ME value in that pasture? What is the utilization by the stock grazing that? How much energy do the stock use in actually harvesting that feed? Start crunching the numbers, and then you roll it into an economic model, and I've got a lot of numbers on it. We actually barely breaking even, in most cases running at a loss, because you have to spray doors. That's where you get all your weeds, etc. And then you look at your repo, those little wet, boggy areas on the farm, which in some cases would put a drain through. It's growing willow weed, and it's a source of potential disease for livestock, etc. And really contributing nothing to your bottom line pastoral farming enterprise, which is what we've proven economically. Just look at that. Forget about the sponges and all that stuff, Callum. It just makes economic sense. But then it's tipped the balance from going from a 2 out of 10. We had improved our stream quality, but suddenly we've done our repo and we've done our steep erodible slopes. And by retiring them, and the water, the Y leaving our farm, remember that the Y enters our farm, the water from the dock estate, so it should be pristine anyway. So it's leaving to go to our neighbours down the road. It's now a 9 out of 10.
Nice.
So from 2 to 9.
2 to 9. And we've done little things where we've got different sort of branches of the Te Mania coming into a central stream at the bottom of our farm. And one particular branch continually had sediment in it. By taking that out and fencing it off and planting it up, within 6 to 12 months, suddenly that sediment was gone. It's just dramatic because you go down to the confluence area where the branches meet and you can see the difference. So what's really cool now, two things, is we've got sediment plates at the bottom of our catchment. So Project Pārori. So the Pārori, for people who don't know, it's a herbivore fish. It doesn't taste very nice. But it's a cool fish because it hangs around, grazes on the zostra when it's there. So the Pārori used to be a bit of a nuisance fish. You get caught in all the nets when the locals were down there harvesting flounder and stuff, but it's disappeared. So it's sort of like a key performance indicator. If we get the zostra back, the Pārori will come back. So now we've got sediment plates are stable at the bottom of our catchment. So we're now at the stage where we can start considering planting back the zostra or seagrass. How cool is that? And most of it's due to what's happened on our farm, but also all our neighbours and stuff have, got on the journey as well, contributing to our success factor, which will be eventually the Pārori coming back. But as you said before, Callum, our neighbours downstream now say the river never comes up as high as it used to. John, when we have a rain event, I've got photos between my bro and I. We've compared what has happened to the river, but because we've installed all those little sponges on the farm, the peak hydrological flows when we get in a rain event is a lot flatter. We've got a flatter curve, and the three things, you look at Cyclone Gabriel. What are the three things that happened with Cyclone Gabriel? When we had that storm, we had water, we had sediment, and we had slash that did all the damage. Slash has never really been a problem on our farm, but certainly the water and the sediment is just basically not a big deal as compared to what it was. So if you look at, say, the little Te Mania Catchment, 1,300 hectares being a microcosm, like it could be if you scaled it up, right, to 13,000 hectares or 130,000 hectares and it did the same thing, you would have that same impact. If you had a Gabriel, sure, you'd still get, a bit of damage, but we could considerably mitigate damage through building resilience into our landscape as we've done if we do that right across the Aotearoa farm.
Awesome, yeah. And I think that's a really important point to make. And you mentioned that your farm's easier to manage and that your brother Rick doesn't have to pull cows out of boggy land when he could be surfing. How else does it make it easier to run your farm or more lucrative?
We sort of talk about going under the red zone and into the blue zone. So a lot of farmers are in the red zone. They're wanting to max out their total production. But what they're doing in doing that, they're stressing out the animals, they're stressing out the environment, they're stressing out themselves. So we're trying to coach farmers to go back into the blue zone. So the blue zone is where you've taken the pressure off your animals. You're focusing more on animal welfare and better production per animal rather than total production. It's more about productivity rather than production. You're actually more profitable. So with our farm, we've taken out about 25% of our effective grassed area, and our pastoral farming enterprise is as profitable, if not more profitable, than what it was when we were doing 100% effective grassed area. But on top of that now, we've got plantings of exotics on our farm. We've got pines, we've got redwoods, we've got lusitanicas. A little amounts in the wrong place, but the rest is good. But we've also got carbon. So we have 15 what they call carbon accounting units registered into the ETS, so we're earning carbon from that. And we've got a beautiful farm. So my bro can go surfing. So Yeah, we're saying farmers, take the pressure off yourselves, get into the blue zone. And so our government is saying, it's all about GDP growth, but not at all. It's about farming in a blue zone where you are more profitable, and you're also building value into you and the story about New Zealand with our produce rather than chasing volume.
Funny you call it blue zones, because there's another movement around the blue zone community, which is hotspots of the world where people live to the healthiest and oldest lifespans. And I think you probably live a lot healthier and older being on a healthy farm, and so does the life of your whenua.
And that too, Callum. Yep.
And I guess whenua, right, that is yourself, your family, that's your community downstream, that is your stock, that's your biodiversity. Like, I feel like everyone seems to be winning in this scenario, including the farmer. So for people who are just at the start of their journey and trying to get into that blue zone, what advice would you share with them? Because the hardest thing usually is to get started.
Yes, it is. And that's where regional councils have a role to play in catchment groups. We're saying to our regional councils, tell us what is the why for our different catchments, because that turns your lights on. It needs to be a biodiversity type why, because that's what we're trying to do. And then tell us what you think we should be doing within our catchments to restore ecological health over time. It's not what we got to do tomorrow, it's what we've got to do in the next 30 years, maybe even longer. So it's a long time horizon. And most of the remedial work that needs to be done is just what we've done on our farm. So it's looking at those riparian areas and then looking at your critical source areas and reestablishing wetlands and taking out some of those really steep erodible slopes which aren't really contributing to your bottom line. But starting the journey is just start small. We try to establish in one of our catchment groups a kitchen window project. You want to start where you're going to see what you're doing every day. It might be when you drive your tractor down or your bike down the race and you see this little wetland that you've planted and suddenly it looks starting to grow. It's looking real cool. And there's some kahikatea in there or whatever. And you think, gee, there's another area on the farm. So it becomes quite infectious and it changes the lens and the way you're looking at your landscapes. So it's those sorts of things that will change, and it's so rewarding to see those areas that you've retired be restored and come back.
Yeah, for sure. In our last episode with Sam Gibson, if you haven't listened to it and you're curious about this, definitely go back and listen to that too. He talks about the big carrot and the small stick, and about how incentives are the best driver of positive farming movements. And yeah, that can come from regulation, but I think what you're saying about the kitchen window project is another type of incentive. It's about, instead of extrinsic motivation, you might get a better premium from Fonterra or a cheaper loaning rate. It's about, you might be more motivated and more inspired and see more joy and passion from what you're doing.
This is strongest incentive is what's happening in your nako, because it drives, say I want to do a little bit more in terms of looking after the whenua, which is the strongest motivator of all. But I must make a point, and Sam probably did too, like a lot of farmers, particularly your dry sop farmers, they haven't got the money to do a lot of that work, particularly the fencing and the planting. And one of the points that really helped us going back is that we had really good financial support from our regional council in helping us to do a lot of that work. And that would apply to a lot of the work right around New Zealand where farmers haven't got that spare cash. And people listening might think, what are they getting those free handouts to do that work? They stuffed it up to start off with. And I go back to them and say, they were only doing from the outset what policy and what the drivers were back at the time. But the biggest one too is externalities. So if we don't do this, the externalities are huge. So if you look at Cyclone Gabriel, the cost of Cyclone Gabriel, I believe, to Hawke's Bay alone was $16 billion. So we're able to build back into our landscape, into our hinterland, that climate resilience. It'll reduce the cost downstream, which makes the incentives to assist farmers look like nothing in terms of improving those downstream impacts.
Yes, and I think that resilience is something crucial that we also talked about with Sam. You're building a community, and that is really beneficial on so many stages of that journey. And I just want to zoom out from the family farm as well into what is now under the management under Project Parore. It's not just about one farm, isn't it? It's about getting the community on board. So how did your journey lead to being involved in, for example, Project Parore, but also in Waikukupu?
Well, Anna, you're so right. This community thing is so good in terms of building wellness and binding a community, giving the whole community purpose about what they want to do. And so that's what we've tried to do with both Project Parore and Waikukupu. So Project Parore, we could see what we've done on our farm, but and other neighbours and stuff were wanting to know what was happening. So we said, let's extend this out and share our journey and our knowledge and build a resource to help people, because the problem was most of the restoration has to happen on commercial farms. That's where the big impact lies. And a lot of those farmers, they're probably in the red zone. You come along to them and say, mate, you need to take that critical source area out, put it in a wetland. They don't want to know, really. Simply, they're stressed. But the other key thing, even if they wanted to do it, is the know-how. Well, where do I go for my trees? What do I do? And regional councils can help, but it's really from a farmer, landowner perspective saying, well, wrapping some help around them and say, well, we can help organise this for you. And that's what catchment groups do, is make that journey easy for those guys. That was my incentive to say, oh, well, we've been able to do this on our farm. Regional councils helped us. How can we extend this reach out to all the other landowners in the community? And as you said, it's got that benefit around building the wellness into our community. So that's what really drove me to be involved.
And I also think a problem shared is a problem halved. If you're all working together, you don't get that feeling of loneliness in the journey either. Like, there's support there, and I think that's something we sometimes underestimate as well.
You did right. And the other thing too is, if we're going to be successful, we need our total community to be on board, all our landowners to be on board. So you take something like environmental weeds, they derive from our urban community, then they bust out, they head along our roadways, our dispersal corridors, and start invading the beautiful ngahere that we've planted. So suddenly we're having to deal with weeds. So if you look at our farm, for example, we're pretty weed-free, but the weeds are coming our way. So I'm saying to our regional council, what are you really doing about environmental weed control? And you can't expect them to do the mahi. I mean, they haven't got the money nor the resources. What we've got to do is engage our total community and educate them about what environmental weeds are, and you mobilise those arms and legs to do that mahi. That's you, yeah.
Amateur question, but can you please explain what an environmental weed is?
Okay, there's weeds and there's weeds. A cool weed, which I really like, is gorse, particularly on steep erodible slopes. A lot of that land actually is growing gorse. So if we want to keep it in pasture or forever spraying it, I call it Scottish manuka.
I love it.
Seriously.
What a romantic sound.
Yeah, because it is actually a colonizer. It's the coolest weed you could have. So when we plant, okay, we might be 100% Kanuka. We might put some what you call broadleaf enrichment species in to bring in the birds, but invariably you get, say, gorse pop up. And even things like inkweed, I used to stress out about that, but now they're like companion plants for the manuka. And then gorse, it'll come up, say, with the manuka, and eventually the kanuka manuka will go over the top of it, and then the gorse dies. It goes away. But the cool thing about gorse, well, two things. It's got a massive taproot. It's a legume, so it creates these nitrogen nodules, which assist the growth of the manuka kanuka. Cool thing is, it keeps the pests out. We've got red deer problem on our property. If I planted a mahoi or a mako or a wineberry or a karamu, if you've got a tree, one of those growing in amongst the gorse, that won't be browsed. So it protects some of those species.
So gorse is a good weed, and we saw that on Haniway Reserve down in the Banks Peninsula. Changed the game there, fools and dreamers. But what would be a bad environmental weed then?
Yeah, so we're going down a rabbit hole here now, Kel. Yes. Now, there's a raft of what are classified as environmental weeds. The worst ones are the viney type weeds that will just grow over and cover your native planting. So you got things like old man's beard. We've got moth plant. You've got Madeira vine. You've got Japanese honeysuckle. But then we've got other trees too. Obviously, your woolly nightshade, Taiwanese cherry, they'll just come up and they'll take over. So we've got to be right on top and control those. I say to my townie mates, look at those beautiful pink flowering Taiwanese cherry. And you start to educate them about what the damage. You take them out to the farm. Well, we've got one area that we're having to really deal to Taiwanese cherry. And this guy was a builder. He says, hey, mate, once since you told me about that Taiwanese cherry, it's really doing my head in. Because I drive along the main road between Katikati and Tauranga, I see all this bloody Taiwanese cherry. I said, mate, I've done my job. I mean, we've got to arrest these things. So when I say landowners dealing with it, I mean all landowners. So I'm talking about NZTA, Waka Kotahi, we've got our Kiwi Rail. All our public landowners have to be part of dealing with environmental weeds. We know what they are and we've got to deal with them. But we use our arms and legs to do it, and we do it in a strategic way by creating containment zones around our urban areas and protection zones around our high-value landscapes.
I'm so glad you addressed that now, because I think invasive weed species are an underestimated threat. We are so used to talking stoats, rats, possums, and all of those species, and we're also aware. But to me, that's where the community comes in again, because you can educate each other through catchment initiatives and build that understanding and ruin people's lives because they can't go for a drive anymore without seeing weeds popping up everywhere. But it is so, so crucial, because it is a problem that needs to be addressed better and understood better. So thank you for going down this rabbit hole with us.
The other thing I'd add is that, and with the catchment groups, we can build in, I know Project Parori, they built this team of Kaitiaki team. So they're doing planting and there's a whole role for them around weed control and animal pest control. So there's year-round mahi for these guys. And I call them Kaitiaki heroes. They're out there doing the mahi day in, day out. They're probably out planting today. It's pouring with rain. But we've got to celebrate those guys. We've got to pay them well. These guys are really, really important to looking after our landscapes and ensuring that the years that we do retire are successful down the track.
Yeah, that's a really good call, and it's not always the most glamorous work, so I think we need to really shine a light on them. Thank you for acknowledging that. I'd just like to shift gears a moment and look at a paper that you recently completed titled Creating a Sustainability Value Chain for NZ Primary Industry, How We Can Go Twice as Fast for Half the Cost, which proposes a strategic overhaul of environmental restoration efforts in our primary sector. What is this paper about, and what experience or discussions brought you to these conclusions?
It's out of frustration, partly, and trying to share learnings from a landowner ground-up perspective. The thing is, we've developed these catchment groups, and they've sprung up, and they're away, but now our government have said we've run out of money. And it seems an irresponsible waste of that public spend to get them up and running. But then you look at the public spend that's been involved, and honestly, we've wasted so much money. Of course, we achieved stuff, but we could have achieved a whole lot more if we'd done it in a more strategic, planned way. So we need to do a bit of proper planning and preparation, because we've done none of that. And then you start reading reports, and so the paper I wrote refers to a whole lot of reports that have been written, which you wonder why people actually bother writing reports. The PCE, Parliamentary Commission for the Environment, done amazing reports. One of them was on environmental weeds. Government doesn't even look at them. Or if they do look at them, they don't read them properly. Or if they do read them properly, they then say, don't do anything about it. And then you've got leaders in our rural sector, our primary sector, saying we need a unified vision for our primary sector team. What is our USP? What's our unique sales proposition for our products that we're exporting overseas? Let's be aligned in what we do. So if you imagine like our primary sector being a team, a rugby team, I reckon if Graham Henry or Richie McCaw walked into the primary sector rugby changing rooms, they'd probably shake their head and walk out. We're looking for leaderships. You try and inquire around leadership from MPI. Honestly, these guys are lost, and I just wonder what's happening. Maybe the government said to them, okay, guys, you're in holding pattern. We're not going to give you any more money. And I feel sorry for the staff there. They've got no direction. So I put up a straw man to say, okay, well, here's a plan. And by doing that, we get alignment. We've got a vision. We align ourselves into a sustainability value chain because we've got competing interests. For example, if you look at our fert companies, all they want to do is sell fert. But on the other hand, we've got to reduce N loss in a lot of our catchment, NNP loss. So how does that work? Are these guys aligned with what we want to achieve as a catchment group? They're struggling, eh? But if through our value chain, they are signing off and joining what we needed to do, and they should be if they're going to be responsible suppliers to our industry and our sector, well, then we can go so much faster. And then by aligning that to our nature positive story in the marketplace, with all our products, Zespri, Fonterra, or whatever, we can authenticate our story. It's no longer greenwash. We're going to be audited by our customers. So here's an opportunity to build a sustainability value chain, which fits all our enterprises or our products across New Zealand. So, I could be a dairy farmer growing some kiwi fruit and have some forestry out the back. All that story I'm telling aligns to what we want to achieve in our catchment.
Yeah, I think that all is super important to be on one page that's going to solve so many issues. So you've got 8 recommendations as part of that paper. Can you just briefly outline what those are?
Well, the first one was creating that vision. And I know Jim Bolger, former Prime Minister, bit of a legend. He's 90 now. He's on the news the other night saying exactly the same thing in terms of, right across for New Zealand. What do we want to achieve across the Aotearoa farm? So developing a landscape plan for the Aotearoa farm is really important. So we've had this situation where we've been randomly planting pine trees all over the place. Some beautiful farms would be just taken out, planting pine trees for carbon. Our lead motivator should be biodiversity first and foremost. Carbon will follow behind, but we've got to get right tree, right place for the Aotearoa farm.
Right, yeah.
And then out of that is then joining what we're telling our customers in the marketplace with what we're actually doing on ground within our catchments, really important. The other thing is that's probably slowed us up is a lot of patch protection. So we've got all these different agencies that popped up around the environment, sustainability. We've got to create clear role definitions, including the catchment groups. So we're not duplicating stuff that's already happening in regional councils and vice versa. So those are really the key recommendations. Then I throw a few extra recommendations in at the end there. And one of them, which is really important in my view, is fixing the ETS and emissions trading scheme. It's not working. Parliamentary Commission for the Environment has said exactly the same thing. I think the other recommendations are around animal and weed pest control, a strategic approach across Aotearoa. We're not there yet, and we've got to involve all our communities. And then one of the other things which I've been working on is low-cost ngahere establishment. So we created that resource around the Te Mata method. And for some reasons, a lot of regional councils are slow adopting that, but there's probably 15,000 hectares planted by that method around New Zealand. We've got plantings that would, in today's terms, would have cost $30,000 a hectare. Some of them are struggling because they're overplanted. They've been planted too close, wrong species. So we've got to get that right. The same sort of planting we're doing now under Te Mata, it's costing between $4,000 and $8,000 a hectare. So we've got to be a whole lot smarter around that as well.
Yeah, right. I think the recommendations you make address really key pain points that if you've been involved in this sector are really major problems. And if you're interested in it, I highly recommend taking a closer look. I'd just like to zoom in on a couple of the recommendations. Why is it really critical that we connect our nature story in the market with catchment-based outcomes on the ground?
It's about authentication, firstly, because we're saying this flowery story about being nature positive, but what does that actually mean on the ground? So if a farmer is doing nature positive work on that farm, which is related to a catchment environmental plan, well, we can score that through a scorecard. But if it's just sort of airy-fairy stuff, well, what does it actually mean if it's linked to a catchment-based outcome? Well, it's got a whole lot more credibility. And that's when you can create that alignment with all the service providers and the community to target those specific outcomes.
And I think there's a couple of other really core elements here I'd like to touch on. One is traceability. In the consumer side of, consumption of products, there's a lot of lies that are told to the end market, and people don't always believe what they're told. So for the public-facing companies that sell our primary products or things that are made from them. I think it's really critical that you can actually prove what you're saying, because trust has been lost in the market in a lot of places. I think as we go forward, that's only going to become more of an issue, and being able to prove that what comes out of this country is trustworthy is just so important.
If we lose credibility, our brand damage will be huge. We should be front-footing all of that, and that then gives us an opportunity to obtain a premium. But if we fall behind, we'll be in catch-up to actually maintain our current level of returns for our products. So we need to front foot that. If we hang back, we're going to be audited against any greenwash, particularly out of Europe. So, no, we've got to be authentic around our story.
On the other side of it, one thing that I've noticed in the 5 to 7 years operating in the environmental space, it's easy to look for funding, but not always ask the full value chain of how that money comes to you and how that cycles back through the economy. And I think it's really important for the whole environmental sector for us to think more along the lines of not so much where's the money and what am I going to spend it on. That's really important. We're very good at effectively spending money, but how does this actually generate value in the market so that we can do this forever and so that we can follow through on 100-year plans?
Yeah, and so that links back obviously to our vision and our story. So we've got to get that right. Farmers still think that we've got the responsibility to feed the world. Like if Aotearoa just slipped into the ocean, they wouldn't even notice. We've got this sort of factory farming mentality, which is where we don't want to be there. Our story should be more like a farmer's market for the rest of the world. So we've got this neat story around, how connected we are to the land, how we're looking after the whenua, a whole story around our biodiversity and what we're doing there. That should be our story. It should be all about our blue zone story.
And then I also really think that the world is so interested in that. We get so much attention on the international stage for our biodiversity. So marrying that up, I think we could be onto a winner and then acting on that big vision. And the other thing that I want to touch on is the Te Mata method, because to me that marries up really, really nicely, being cost effective for the farmer or whoever the landowner is, but also bringing back biodiversity values to your land. Can you just explain a little bit more what that approach is about and why we should really consider that moving forward?
Well, the biggest one there, Anna, is the cost, but it just makes perfect sense. Some of the slopes, even on our farm, you can see little kānuka popping up. And if you just left it over time, it would naturally revert into kānuka. And we have got areas where it has actually naturally reverted. And then that's sort of like the first stage, the whenua healing herself. Those first colonisers come up. And kānuka and manuka is renowned for bringing in the friendly fungi, the mycorrhizae. We've done soil tests on our farm in a pasture situation, and you look at the fungal to bacterial ratios in your pasture, there's very little fungal in your pasture. Whereas you go into mature ngahere and you take a soil sample, it's about 80 to 90% fungal versus bacteria. So that process of conditioning the soil is done by those colonisers, and particularly manuka and kānuka. And then what if you just plant 100%, say, kānuka on a steep slope, and this is on what's happening on our farm, is that suddenly the manu start doing the job for you, and there'll be residual seed in the soil, but you're seeing ferns coming out, and then suddenly you see a little mahoi or something pop up, or a hangi, and so all the grass starts dying off. And there's a switching point when suddenly you see the biome's changed. And then you see these other little broadleaf plants, which I haven't planted. The manu, Papatūānuku, has done the mahi here. So this natural process starting to happen. And then you've got to get inside your head that the establishment of native forest is, the age is 10 times that of a human. So like a 10-year-old kānuka stand is just a 1-year-old kid. A 100-year-old forest is a 10-year-old kid. Our tuakana trees, which you see down in Puriora, they're our kaumatuan. They're our elders of the forest. They're 800 years old. They're equivalent like an 80-year-old human. So you start thinking about that process. You don't want to rush it. Just let nature take its course. And so what we're finding is that we just plant pretty well 100% Manuka Kanuka, allow that natural review process to start happening. And then we look at introducing succession trees, because you'll see rewa pop up, in some cases tōtara, because they seed really easy. But you look at the trees that struggle to spread and where your plantings are, because if you've got adjoining native, it'll happen pretty quickly. But if you're sort of isolated, then you bring in things like Cody, because Cody spreads really slowly, and you do those little groves and you introduce them as well and start that process. Then let nature take its course. Papatūnuku, do her thing.
So essentially you're kickstarting what nature does by planting those colonizer species and then just let the healing, like assisted healing for the whenua.
And that's a cool story, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a
And
beautiful story.
it's amazing. I mean, the point you make about the fungal system, I just find so fascinating because, like, you want to create the conditions so that the whenua can accelerate its healing. And I'm just imagining, what if I planted a big kauri into a pasture that was mostly bacterial, or, planted a meter tall totara into that bacterial pasture? It probably wouldn't survive as well. So it's just,
If at all.
yeah, if at all. And it just seems to align so much with the natural reversion rather than trying to pretend that we know better.
Yeah, and we've actually done that. Like when I first started planting, you're trying to rush things. Once you think of the time cycle, and one of the things that really switched my way of thinking, I read this cool book written in Europe. I think it was in Denmark or something like that. It's called The Secret Life of Trees.
Oh, yes, Peter Vullibud.
Germany, John.
It was Germany. Yeah, no, definitely Germany. Everyone's got to read it. Honestly, it just changed. It's about the fungal populations and how trees talk. And you've got these communities of trees and this amazing life that happens under the soil. And it's all scientifically based. It sort of changes the way you think. I have planted, say, the likes of a rimu. When I planted my Manuka Kanuka, and it just sat there sulking, because as you said, it's sort of in the soil, which isn't totally right. And then the rimu I've planted, because I wait for that soil biome to change. You see it happening in the Manuka Kanuka is sort of like about 8 feet tall. And then you start bringing in those succession trees and suddenly they just take off, and those trees will catch up to the ones you planted when you planted the Manuka Kanuka.
That is so exciting. I love success stories like that. I've got goosebumps right now. So you've mentioned the Aotearoa farm plan before. What would that look like across the country for our environment, in our communities, if we would all start working together and adapting the recommendations in your paper?
Oh, the vibrancy. It'd just be amazing, wouldn't it? I mean, and we've got farmers around the country who have done similar things to us. If you could just connect the dots so everyone's doing it, imagine that. So it'd be joining the mountains to the sea. We'd have these bird corridors, would have vibrant communities where everyone's working. Like I'm involved with another group, Te Waiwaka, Pāropata, real legend, and the vision and the concepts behind restoring the mauri to our environment, the life forces to our environment, and to ourselves would be huge. Ka ora te whenua, ka ora te tangata, and that would be the result. It would be amazing. And would have kaitiaki, rangatahi being out there looking after our environment. They'd be rewarded, our kaitiaki heroes, and would be a vibrant community around that. And I don't know if you guys have read the book Donut Economics.
Kate Raworth, I haven't yet.
No, I haven't.
You haven't read that? See, our economists are basically dinosaurs. All they think about is GDP growth. I mean, that's last century. And doing the same thing that got us to where we are is not going to fix the problems. We've got to think outside the square. And so we've got to start thinking of those concepts around that holistic approach. Ka ora te whenua, ka ora te tangata. I mean, we'd be amazing country.
I think that if I try and identify the elephant in the room here, is that as a country, we seem to put things into silos, and we have this economy silo over here and profit and income and wealth and stuff. And then we have the environment silo over here and community and culture and all of that. And we kind of treat them as two separate things, and that the economy, improving the economy means harming the silo, and improving our environment and our communities means harming the economy. But like, the fact is that they are connected. And I think what you're saying about connecting our nature story and the market to catchment-based outcomes, connecting the Māori of the whenua, the life force of the connections in our ecosystem results in healthier, happier, more vibrant communities. That means that we have got the right foundations for a healthier economy. It means we have better pricing power to charge a premium for our products on the world. Like, these are not separate. And the more that we can actually, as a nation, see that this is all part of the same picture, and that investing in this bucket helps this bucket, the quicker we're going to get to what would be a dream state for this amazing country.
I agree. So that's all embedded back into our vision. So it's getting all the silos together and saying, well, where do we want to be in 50 years, 100 years' time? And that's a bipartisan agreement. So it's sort of like we change governments. We might extend the term out to 4 years. Well, big deal, 4 years is nothing. And so that our future governments stick to that pathway. We're not veering. There's no political BS. There's some must-dos that we do in terms of our vision and where we want to go. What we should do is get all you young guys to write the vision for us. You're inheriting the mess. And that's what Jim Bolger was saying the other day. He's 90 years old, saying exactly the same thing. Former Prime Minister. Pretty cool. There's a whole lot of things. Is this costing our country a whole lot of money because we're veering like a out-of-control vehicle down the road instead of being really focused on what that big picture vision where we want to go. And it includes, whole story with our Indigenous people, our beautiful Māori people. And that's a key part of our story.
Absolutely. And Māori thriving means everyone thrives. It's not this or that. It's not us or them. It's all of us together.
Exactly. The Te Ao Māori approach to where we need to go is a key part of that vision. Definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
100%. And I think that coming together, that's going to be a big part of solving these problems. So I really hope that by having these kōreros like today, we can speed that up and we can open people's minds on living together. Part of our mission is making conservation more mainstream for that environmental change as well. So what I'd be really curious to know, John, is what does conservation mean to you?
Conservation to me means preserving what we've got. We've got to go further than that, Anna. We've got to restore. We've overshot what we got, but there's an enhancing that. We need to actually restore a whole lot of sections of our environment, which will make us a whole more vibrant society and place going into our future.
Yeah, definitely. So just to wrap up here, I really appreciate the wisdom and the knowledge you brought today. Let's say people want to find out more. Where can they go to read your paper? Is it available? And how can they get involved in their local catchment group? I'm mindful that not everyone listening to this is in the Bay of Plenty. So is there a way that people can connect into the movement and just dive deeper into what you're suggesting?
If you've got any listeners who haven't got a local catchment group, they could connect to CCA or Community Catchments Aotearoa. The other one is Land Care Trust New Zealand. They actually help set up catchment groups. They're a funded organisation. They do a really good job. So they're certainly worth contacting as well. And the paper, I've just sent it far and wide, but we should make it available online through Waikokupu probably.
Once it's online, we'll publish it on the page where this podcast is. So, if you're listening to it, look below or side or that side or up or down, and it'll hopefully be there.
Cool.
Thank you for your time, John, and chatting with us today.
Yeah,
Kia ora.
Kia ora.